I'm going to talk about the aims and purpose of monetary valuation. I'm going to start by talking about what is value, and then talk about types of value, why you would actually want to do that, and in the end show some applications. This is where we are in the sequence. This is the first of 3 weeks about monetary valuation. The next 2 weeks will be about methods for putting price tags on things that are not traded on markets. I'm going to start by talking about the history of value. What did economists past think about value? And theory of value is at the core of economics, and every major school of economic thought had something different to say about this. Aristotle is probably the first recognizable economist, and he distinguished between the value in exchange, what you can get for something in the market, or what you need to pay for something on the market, and its value in use, what it's actually worth to you. And he was puzzled by this paradox. Why are diamonds so expensive, utterly useless, whereas definitely at that time diamonds were just ornamental? They do have industrial applications now, but not in his time. Whereas water was free, and of course we can't live without water, and in his time water was free. You did not have to pay anything for it. And he was greatly puzzled by this, because the thing that is intrinsically very valuable was worth nothing on the market, whereas something that is intrinsically useless was very expensive on the market. And he actually throughout most of economic history, in medieval times to in the times of the Enlightenment, people did recognize the value in exchange, the market value, the price of something was determined by demand and supply. How much you want of something relative to how much there is of that something. They realized that, but they were just not interested in that. That was just fluff to them. They were interested in the intrinsic value of something, the value in use. And Aristotle's solution to this was to argue that the value of something is what it should be worth. And he argued from philosophical principles, from humanist principles, that some things are simply more worthy than others, and that was based on reasoning and introspection. And that was the true worth of something. That changed. Another major thinker that is listed here is St. Augustine, and he did not argue so much from a philosophical perspective, but rather from a theological perspective, that something is worth what God thinks it's worth. And it's the job of people like himself to figure out what God would think about these things. But there is an intrinsic value, and that intrinsic value is what God attached to something. Move back another 800 or so years forward in time. Thomas Aquinas also wrote extensively about value, but basically said what Augustine said. Nothing much changed in this thinking. And of course, Augustine essentially said what Aristotle said, that the value of something is what it should be worth, and whether that is derived from an interpretation of the Bible or the interpretation of some great philosophical thought is, of course, largely irrelevant. This was the dominant thinking for a very long time, that the value in use is some intrinsic thing that we should try and discover by studying the Bible or through introspection. That started changing in the 17th century. Bill Petty wrote that labor is the father and active principle of wealth, as lands are the mother, where essentially he argued that the intrinsic value of something is some combination of labor and land. Canet disagreed with that. He argued that the value of something equals the amount of land that is contained in that particular something. He actually went back a bit in time before Petty and argued that God created the earth, the laws of nature are God's given, and our society's touching point, our point of interaction with nature is agriculture. And therefore the things that agriculture does, not so much the things that farmers do, but rather the things that the land and the soil and the water and the rain and the sun do, that is determined by the laws of nature, that is written by God, and that is how value is created. Other economic activities, such as manufacturing or trade, or even the work that farmers do on the land, that is not really valuable. And the only thing that is valuable, the only thing that creates value is the land. That is what he argued. And this is not a strange thing to argue for somebody who is a landowner and works at the court of Louis XV, right? This serves the ruling classes of France at the time. But this was a land theory of value. Something is valuable, the value of something equals the amount of land that is contained in the product. Adam Smith had a different view on this, writing that if among a nation of hunters, for example, it usually costs twice the labor to kill a beaver which it does to kill a deer, one beaver should naturally exchange for or be worth 2 deer. This is the labor theory of value, where the worth of something is proportional to the amount of labor that is contained in that something. Adam Smith was actually not the first to write this. Even Godin wrote this centuries before he did, but Smith was not aware of these writings. And the labor theory of value by Smith was, of course, further elaborated by David Ricardo and particularly Karl Marx. In the previous century, Nicholas Ceausescu-Rögen and a couple of other ecological economists have argued that the value of something is the amount of energy that is contained in that something. Not a lot of traction, but that is what they said. And more recently even, these two gentlemen, Ries and Wockernagel, in their promotion of the carbon footprint, essentially return to a land theory of value, where they say that value of something good is equivalent to the amount of land that you needed to produce that good, and if there is something bad like pollution or climate change, then the value of that negative thing, the negative value of that, is the amount of land that you need to restore the damage. So if you emit CO2 burning fossil fuel, you do damage, and that damage is equal to the number of hectares of trees that you need to plant in order to absorb that CO2 again. And that is how they get to the carbon footprint, which is essentially how much land do you need to live the life that you do. And of course what they find is that we need much more land than we have, and they call that overshoot. And that is what you see in this graph here. Is essentially when do you exceed your land allocation? And if you take, for instance, Luxembourg, then in 2018, by February 19, 2018, they had used all the area of Luxembourg already, and everything that happened after February 19 is their overshoot, how much more land the Luxembourgians needed. Luxembourg is probably needed than they had, which is a land theory of value, essentially, because you compare everything to the amount of land that you have. And of course, you can do this for the world as a whole as well. It's not on that graph as far as I can see. The crucial thing about all these alternative theories of value, whether it's ethics or religion or land or labor or energy, is that there is an absolute yardstick. Value is something intrinsic, and there is an absolute value, an absolute number attached to that value. The upshot, and this is particularly important in the older theories of value, is that if prices deviate from the marginal values, from its intrinsic value, if the price you get from the market or you have to pay on the market is different than the intrinsic worth of that something, that is because there is something wrong with the market. Now, that was definitely true for the reasoning of Aristotle and Augustine and Aquinas. It's also true for Marxist reasoning, and it's also true for environmentalist reasoning. There is something wrong with the market because the prices deviate from the true worth. The market is immoral. The classical theories of value, particularly the labor theory of value of Smith and Ricardo, is a little bit different there, because they actually thought that the market price reflected the labor content, so in that sense the price was right, but they of course also argued with what we now call the first fundamental welfare theorem, that the free market would lead to a greater optimum, and therefore the market is moral. The market gives the morally right result. But in that sense, they are similar to other theories of value, that this is seen through a lens of morality, that sort of the things that we observe as happening on the market, we attach a moral judgment to those things.